Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Let me begin by introducing a certain person to you, a person who is very important in the world of gaming research, and a person who has created a certain paradigm in Polish pedagogy and psychology, a certain paradigm when it comes to computer games and how to research computer games. This lady, the Professor Maria Braun-Gałkowska from the Catholic University of Lublin, she conducted in the 90s a whole set of experiments, a whole set of research, and then she published an article called Computer Games and Child Psychology. And she said that if you go to any store that sells games, you will see that 90% of this is about violence, where you fight against human characters or some animals or aliens, and when you kill your victim, you can take a look at the kill, you can stomp on the body of your victim or look in the eyes of your victim as you kill them, and of course everything is accompanied by sounds of violence and sounds of fighting. So that's exactly the paradigm that we see today. That's how we look at video games. Video games as something that's brutal, demoralizing content that is always accessible to kids, nevertheless, notwithstanding their age, and so on and so on. So that's the one thing. Another thing that people think of when they think of computer games, they think of addictions. And I think that's a better direction for research than trying to research the influence of violent games on child psyche. Very often, the starting point for researching video games is exactly that. Some of my colleagues, friends who are researchers, and they try to research how video games can develop, how they can motivate kids into action, that you have the idea of flow, the idea of flow in video games, and that flow was created. The notion of flow was created by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, a Hungarian scientist. And when these guys said, "I want to research video games," people were saying, "Oh, you want to research addictions?" And he said, "No, I want to research the positive things." And they said, No, that's not the right subject." So when you look at computer games, and when Professor Braun-Gałkowska was writing and publishing her article, but also today, there are plenty of very vivid examples. You have on the right-hand side, in the top corner, a game called Blood, where you can kill people in many different ways. There is another picture from the game GTA 5. From 2013, when an innocent person is being tortured. But that's just a part of a very, very complicated phenomenon that video games are. That's a quote from Professor Henry Jenkins, who is a cultural scientist, a very prominent person when it comes to research into video games. You may know this gentleman and his notions of, for example, culture of convergence. So he's asking, are video games a black hole that sucks in all the energy and all the money? Are video games a Christmas nightmare, as one of senators said? Or maybe, or it was called Nightmare Before Christmas, which was a movie by Harry Selick and Tim Burton. Some people say it is a nightmare because come Christmas time, they have to buy a video game for a kid. Do video games teach our children to kill others? That's what journalists seem to tell us. But actually, computer games are a form of art, are a form of emerging art, and unappreciated art, but still, it is a form of art. When Jenkins said that, it was in the beginning of this century. He used a certain comparison. Maybe it wasn't very sort of scientific, but he was saying computer games are at the beginning of the century are more or less at the same stage of development as cinema in the 20s. So video games were pretty young, so to speak. People like Rudolf Arnheim knew that cinema had a future ahead of itself back in the 1920s. But, well, at some point, no one knew how it would develop. When you look at this, well, on top, you have a scene from Jane Henson's movie called Maze or Labyrinth, which is like what's happening in the mind of a young person who thinks which game to play. So if you enter the mind of this young school child, it turns out this school child has a huge selections of games to play. Games where they can kill and stomp on the bodies of the killed victims. But there's other games, Kentucky Route Zero, which is an adventure game. An adventure game that is based a little bit on Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Dali. There's a game that's an adaptation of Salome by Oscar Wilde, for example. I'm a theater expert by training, so to me it was very interesting how this was created. This War of Mine, which is a Polish production actually, and this is a game about people who are civilians who are trying to survive in a war city. A city that's invaded by war. You have The Witcher, which is again based on a Polish novel. Grand Theft Auto, GTA, very brutal, very violent game that you are in the role of a gangster. Botanicula, which is an adventure game about tiny seeds that are trying to survive by beating spiders. And it has it's for anyone, regardless of their age. Shelter is about a badger mother who is taking care of her cubs, of her young. And there is another game, X-Plane 10, which is a flight simulator. So, as you can see, computer games are so diverse. The world of computer games is so multifaceted and so diverse that if you say computer games are like this, computer games have this influence on the psyche, it's as if you were saying the whole food has this and that influence on the psychology, or watching movies. But the question is, what are you eating? What movies are you watching? Because there is no one influence that computer games have on young audience. Computer games are too varied and diversified to have one kind of influence. Most research is not narrow enough. Most research, just like the one I mentioned at first by Professor Maria Gałkowska, she was focused on FPP or FPS games, and that's the conclusion she drew. But she drew it about all games. So, again, that's another quotation. When there are children who are addicted to games, they are very often seen by teachers as layabouts, like all the other kids are studying hard, and you guys, you're just playing games. But these kids are not stupid. They are in a stupid predicament. They are in a stupid position, but they are not stupid themselves. The problem is not that they play games a lot. The problem is that no one is guiding them through their games. Parents, most of the time, can't help them. The teachers don't tell them which games are worthwhile, which games are nice. And it's usually games that are targeted at to a certain age group, most of the time end up in the hands of younger children, and no one does anything about it. So if you're looking for a better game, a more worthwhile game, a more interesting game, it's difficult to find help, find someone who will give you a recommendation. The problem of violence in video games most of the time is solved by the PEGI system, PEGI, which is a system of age category or age groups for different games, and there are bullet points of what this game contains, and that's why it's from this age. But most of the time, parents have no idea about the PEGI system, and they don't look at it. They don't pay attention to this. But actually, every box in which a game comes has a PEGI classification. So my time is running up, but still. Let me finish. Why are games, video games, interesting as a tool for education? Well, there is a games designer and a games researcher called Ralph Koster. He's got a book out, Theory of Fun for Game Design. He says all games are educational. That's what he says. So I'm going to briefly describe his theory to you. This guy, Koster, says that in each computer game or each video game, you have a set of challenges that you have to surmount. And how do you surmount those challenges? Because you see patterns and you use those patterns to complete the tasks. And the tasks that seemed overwhelming at first, when you know the pattern, you can overcome your or the obstacle. Just like when you played Super Mario Brothers when you were younger. First you learn to go to the left, then you learn to go to the right, then you learn to jump up, then you learn to jump on top of a little monster, then you learn that when you jump up and you hit your head on a brick, you'll get a benefit or something. You see a pattern, you learn different skills, and then you can conquer or overcome those challenges. And it's best when the level of complexity is gradual or raises gradually so that you can use what you have learned before. So it's exactly what education is all about. Most pleasure that we're getting from video games is derived because I've learned something and then I could use it in practice to overcome some difficulties. So that's exactly what we really want to see in children. Pure joy of learning. In games, you have that pure joy of learning because I'm learning, and thanks to this, I'm winning. I still have 10 minutes to go. So, Ralph Koster is saying it might be something you might argue with, but still, it's interesting. He says that the most interesting layer in the game is the gameplay itself, not the story or the characters, but the gameplay itself. So when you play a shooting game, the most important thing is the fact that you are shooting, not who you are shooting at. The fact that I'm doing the shooting. If I have a game in which I am torturing or decimating the bodies of zombies, or if I'm torturing living human beings in a game, it doesn't matter who I'm doing it to. Is it zombies or is it living human beings? So it could be, well, just like with movies, when if there is a just vengeance seeker and they kill people, we can justify that because it's a good hero, it's a good character. So the gameplay is the most important. So what can you learn from a shootout game? Definitely you learn space and how to navigate spaces, how to fight for your own, how to respond and react quickly, how to take initiative, how to solve conflicts, and how to compete. And that's something that you're learning. You're not learning how to shoot other people in the street or how to drive into other people in the street. There are some negative consequences. For example, the fact that we are learning that we should always have the final say, where we always have the final say. But there are some other games that are more team games. And in this case, you can learn cooperation rather than I have to have the final word. We can learn empathy from video games. We can learn decision making. We can learn cooperation. We can learn conflict solving, perseverance. So these are Koster's tips that you have to take into account when you create, when you design a game. So he's saying the most important thing is a game is what type of activities and what type of decisions we're making in the game. Another thing is that a simulated world, a world in a game, cannot be one-dimensional. It cannot be just one problem. But a game is like a problem. But a problem that's wrapped in narration. So in a video game, you can create a narration, a narrative that is such that the problem is not obvious, that the gamer has to look for the problem itself. Just like when you're telling people to learn their bachelor's, to write their bachelor's thesis. After 2 or 3 years of studies, sometimes they don't even see the problem, let alone being able to write their thesis. All educational games can be educational. Like, for example, when you do one task, then you answer a question about, well, there has to be some where you destroy a wall and then you answer a question about the alphabet and then you do something else. No, there has to be a flow, a connection between the subject of the game and what you're getting from it and so on. So that are examples of games who are actually following all the guidelines for a good game, a well-designed games. Republia Downs. It's a game where you are creating a front page of a newspaper. So you're getting a set of wire messages from press agencies or news agencies, and it's your choice what to put on the front page, what's going to be big news, what's going to be small news, and what's going to be out of the front page. In this game, you are a totalitarian newspaper, or you are a newspaper in a totalitarian country. So, for example, Republia Downs enemy satellite. It's something that you would do well to use. But your newspaper might be contacted by rebels who are saying, please sneak in some news that are against the authorities. And actually, 10 minutes or an hour with this game might be better than 10 classes of civil society education. So they're learning a lot. That's another one, Papers, Please. The same author, Lucas Pope, designed it. Again, the game is about a fictional totalitarian regime where you are at the border crossing and you have two stamps. You either approve or deny someone's entry. There is a woman who says, please let me in. I don't have all the documents, but if I go to my country, I will be killed. So, do you approve or not? Because if you approve, you save this woman. But if you approve her entry without papers, then someone can have a problem. You might have problems, or your family might have problems. That's another game called This War of Mine, a Polish production. It's a game about people trying to survive in a sieged city. This game was created in cooperation with people who survived the siege of Sarajevo back in the day. It draws on experiences of refugees from Syria, also some experience from people who lived through the nightmare of the Warsaw Uprising. So, if you are 100% ethical and moral, you will not survive. If you start becoming completely demoralized, attacking people for food, not helping when someone helps, again, you'll be in trouble. So there is a balance between the game mechanics. The game mechanics actually tells you to try to survive for as long as possible, but there are some moral dilemmas. And the characters will not handle too much of immoral and unethical behavior. So very interesting game. That's another thing. It's called A Slower Speed of Light, another game, very interesting, that shows you the relativism in physics. You go around and you eat small balls, and the more of the little balls you eat, the slower the speed of light becomes, and then the world, the light has a slower speed, so you see colors differently, and the waves, the light waves are seen differently, and there's a curvature of space around you as the light slows. Something that now you can explain this theory to a teenager without coming to some very advanced mathematical theories, because they can imagine what it would be like if the light was slower. So amazing, very nice experiment, and it was created by someone from MIT. That's another example. Go to this link. It's a list created by a physicist, Dr. Piotr Migdał, a list of science-based games. Simple games. Most of them are you can obtain for free, because the market of educational games for the youngest kids about letters and numbers is pretty okay. But what about older kids? Biology, society, physics. We need more science-based games, and we need to know where to find them. So, sorry for everything that I haven't mentioned because of time, but, well, thank you for your attention.